Hey guys, it's Miss Fibber Johnson,
And Mr. Nash.
and we are here today to talk about looking at your audience when you write your paper. And there's lots of different audiences, and you really need to think about what audience you are writing to. If you're writing to your peers, you might have a different audience. You might be able to say different things than if you're writing to a group of adults or a group of academic people. So you really need to think about who is going to be reading your paper and why.
Yeah, when you're writing, you should have a purpose, and who's gonna what's your end result of your paper? Who's gonna read it? And make sure that you tailor both your style and the evidence you choose to include in your paper to fit that particular audience. And we'll show you an example and have you try it out in this video. So let's begin by talking about some possible audiences nowadays. So who are you writing for is one thing that you should be thinking about throughout the paper. And hint, although we're going to be reading it, you're not writing for us. You should be writing for someone else. Like your paper should have a greater purpose than just a grade. So who are you writing for? Who's going to read your paper? A common way to publish work, and something that we might have you do or you might do on your own, is to publish some of your thoughts on a blog online. And a blog is something that anyone could read. So your evidence that you choose should be clear and easy to understand. You have to assume that you might have some novices on the topic reading your work. You might have some experts reading your work. So the style you choose and the evidence you choose should be clear and easy to understand. The style should be a little bit more formal depending on the blog, because you don't want your credibility to be shot. If you were to go online and read someone's opinion and they're writing way too casual, you're going to say, I don't think this person knows what they're talking about.
And by casual, I mean you don't want to be putting things like LOL and JK in your paper. That you don't put that into any type of writing.
That doesn't make you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Right. So don't use things like that. Any kind of text writing doesn't go into blogging or peer writing or any kind of writing unless you're literally on a cell phone.
Yeah. So you can, by casual, I mean that you can be a little less formal, but you should never be cross the line of being too informal in your writing. Now, another audience that's very common is writing to your peers. Like you might write something on an issue that you think other students should know about.
Like if you're writing for the school newspaper or that type of thing. Mr. Nash and I write for our peers all the time when we write to other colleagues or we write papers to present to other teachers in the building or people that we work with. That's us writing to our peers, and you would be writing to your peers a lot of times, especially when you're in high school and as you go into college and then as you go into the workplace.
So when you're writing to your peers, you can kind of talk as if you're one of them. So like you're all in it together kind of thing. You should make sure to use evidence that they understand without having to do too much research. So you don't want to, if you're writing to your peers, you don't want to use all sorts of like really complex examples that not everyone might understand, because that's not the purpose of that paper. You also can be a little bit more informal and casual in your tone or your style, but not crossing the line of being like text language.
Right. Never use text
language. You still want to sound knowledgeable.
Never use cuz, C-U-Z.
And for the purposes of most things that you might do in social studies, usually when we're doing historical research, your audience would be more of an academic audience. Like you're actually writing to inform people. And if your paper is to provide an opinion for an academic purpose, you can use some more complex and advanced things. You can assume that your reader knows some basics about the topic, because they're not going to be reading a paper on why some historical event happened without first knowing what that historical event is. And your style should be very formal, and you should sound like an expert. Like when you're writing for the academic purposes, you know what you're talking about, and you're telling them.
You are the expert.
You are the expert. So you can see that depending on where your paper is going to go and who's reading it, you kind of tailor how you write it differently.
Exactly.
So that's what we're talking about in this. And this is hard to do because most people just write one way and that's the way they write. So we're asking you to write differently depending on who your paper is going to be for. So here's a little example that I wrote this about cell phones in schools. And I wrote it to my peers and then to academic research. So if I'm writing to my peers about cell phones in schools, my claim is going to be allowing cell phones in school makes the job of the teacher easier. So I'm a teacher. I'm writing to other teachers. Watch what I do when I write this way. I'm actually going to talk to them like we're together. Like I can talk to them like we're one. We're like kind of in it together. So check this out. You know the feeling well. The peaceful silence of your classroom is interrupted by the ding of a student's cell phone. Maybe they just received a text from a fellow student. Maybe it was just a junk email. But either way, you know you have to act. Cell phones are against school policy, and you need to figure out who has the phone and confiscate it. What a pain. But imagine for a second if cell phones were allowed in school. You hear the ding, but no big deal. Students continue to work without interruption. There is no doubt that in this day and age, school policies that ban cell phones are a lot of work for teachers. Every student has one. They use them all the time. Enforcing a policy that bans cell phones is like swimming against the current. No matter how hard you try, you never make it where you want to go. By allowing cell phones in schools, teachers could relax and stop worrying about enforcing a rule that is archaic and time-consuming. So this is me writing, and you can see my tone. I still talk like I know what I'm talking about.
He's still formal,
But
but
I'm-
he's writing to a colleague.
So it's a little bit, we can talk about like, oh, we're both teachers, we're both in the classroom together. Compare that to my other sample here, where I'm writing for academia or for like a research paper, where I'm assuming like I'm going to have maybe other researchers or other colleges read this, and I'm kind of making, or maybe the Board of Ed, or maybe the superintendent. This is kind of how I'd write for that audience, and look at the difference.
He brings in for senses. According to research done by Edutopia, roughly 90% of all middle school students own a cell phone. With so many students owning cell phones, schools are scrambling to keep tabs on their students and their cell phone use. But is it worth it? Studies conducted by Dr. Burns of Harvard University show that many teachers report dissatisfaction with school cell phone policies. According to the report, more than half of teachers believe that enforcing cell phone policies is more work than it's worth. Confiscating a phone causes them to have to make an official referral and call parents that involves timely paperwork and dealing with upset parents.
So you can see I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying it in two different ways. This one is much more like I'm putting you in the scenario because you've been there before, because we're in it together for my peers. And this is very much more like maybe not teachers are going to read it. Okay, so if you're not a teacher, you might not know the feeling well, like I stated here in my peer sample. So you can see this is what we want you to do. Think of your audience and tailor your writing for that audience. Okay, so let's practice this. I want you to write 2 sample body paragraphs. And in these 2 sample body paragraphs, I'd like you to write them for 2 different audiences. So at the top of your page, write audience and write what audience you're intending it for, and then flash draft a sample paper using this evidence, or a sample paragraph. And then write the same paragraph again using the same evidence, but for a different audience. And when we check this work, we want to see how your writing has actually changed to tailor it to the 2 different audiences.
So we're looking for the same kind of material, but tailoring it to 2 different audiences.
Just like I did with mine, right here, you're going to do with yours. So the claim is allowing cell phones at school will improve learning, and here's some evidence you can use. Which evidence you pick for each section could be different depending on your audience.
Maybe one audience is your parents, and another audience is peers, or one audience is the Board of Education, and another audience is teachers, or whatever.
Okay, so pause the video and write those 2 paragraphs now.